She bought a shabby thrift store for a new start. But one forgotten donation box didn't belong there. Inside waited $15 million in missing jewels. And a truth that could cost her everything. Before we dive in, tell me, what's the most unexpected thing you've ever found in a thrift store? The envelope sat on the kitchen counter like an accusation. Nina Vasquez stared at it while washing dishes in the tiny apartment she could no longer afford. Her hands moved mechanically through soapy water, scrubbing plates from a dinner she'd barely eaten. The eviction notice had arrived 3 days ago, 30 days to vacate, 30 days to figure out where a single mother and her 6-year-old daughter would sleep. Outside, rain tapped against the window. The sound used to be comforting. Now it just reminded her of leaks she couldn't fix and problems she couldn't solve. "Mommy, can I have more juice?" Nina turned to see Lucia at the table, homework spread out in front of her. The girl's hair was pulled back in a lopsided ponytail. Nina had done that morning before her shift at the diner. Before her second shift cleaning offices downtown. Before collapsing into bed at midnight only to wake at 5 and do it all again. "Of course, baby." Nina poured the last of the juice into Lucia's cup. Tomorrow she'd need to buy more. Tomorrow she'd need to figure out everything. She glanced at her phone on the counter. The bank app was still open from the 10th time she'd checked it today. $8,547. 3 years of saving every spare dollar. 3 years of double shifts and skipped meals and telling Lucia they couldn't afford new shoes just yet. It wasn't enough for first month, last month, and deposit on a decent apartment. It wasn't enough for anything that would keep them safe. Nina closed her eyes and tried to breathe through the tightness in her chest. That's when she saw it. The classified ad was open on her laptop, left over from this morning's desperate search. She'd been looking for cheap apartments, studio spaces, anything. But her eyes caught on a different listing buried at the bottom of the page. Thrift store for sale, established location, owner, retiring, $8,500, includes inventory and upstairs apartment, cash only, serious buyers. Nina's heart kicked once, hard. A thrift store, an apartment above it. $8,500, exactly what she had saved. She read the ad 3 more times, her mind racing. It was insane. She didn't know anything about running a business. She'd never even managed a cash register beyond her waitressing job. But the apartment, a place to live that no one could take away, a place that would be theirs. Her phone buzzed, a text from her friend Maria. "Did you find anything yet? You can crash with us for a week if you need to." Maria's apartment had 1 bedroom and 4 people already. Nina knew what a week meant. It meant sleeping on a couch with Lucia curled against her, trying not to be a burden, trying not to take up space. She looked at Lucia, bent over her homework, tongue poking out in concentration. Nina opened the ad again and called the number. The thrift store sat on a corner in a neighborhood that had seen better days. Faded awnings, cracked sidewalks, windows covered in yellowed newspaper and handwritten signs advertising sales from months ago. Nina stood outside with Lucia's hand in hers, staring at the building like it might disappear if she blinked. "Is this it?" Lucia asked. "Yeah, baby, this is it." The owner was a man in his 70s named Mr. Kowalski. He had kind eyes and hands that shook slightly when he unlocked the front door. "Been here 40 years, he said, leading them inside. "But my knees can't take the stairs anymore. And my daughter, she wants me to move to Arizona. Says the heat's good for arthritis." The store smelled like dust and old fabric and something faintly sweet Nina couldn't identify. Racks of clothes crowded the narrow aisles. Shelves sagged under the weight of books, dishes, picture frames. A cash register from the 1982nd sat on a counter covered in price stickers and faded receipts. Lucia's eyes went wide. "It's like a treasure hunt." Mr. Kowalski smiled. "That's what I always told people. You never know what you'll find." He showed them the small office in the back, the storage room stacked with unmarked boxes, the bathroom with its cracked mirror. Then he led them upstairs to the apartment. It was small, 1 bedroom, a living space barely big enough for a couch, a kitchen with outdated appliances. But the windows let in light, and the floors were solid. And when Nina stood in the bedroom, imagining Lucia asleep in a bed that couldn't be taken away, something in her chest loosened. "I'll be honest with you," Mr. Kowalski said. "Business isn't what it used to be. People shop online now. Some days I don't make enough to cover utilities. But the bones are good, and if you're willing to work, there's potential here." Nina walked through the apartment again, touching the walls, testing the faucets. Her mind calculated and recalculated. Inventory, utilities, rent. No, not rent. Ownership. This would be theirs. "I'll take it," she said. Mr. Kowalski blinked. "Don't you want to think about it? Talk to someone?" "I've thought about it. I'll bring the cash tomorrow." She had already talked to someone. Maria had called her crazy. Her mother had said she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Everyone told her to be practical, to be smart, to find a normal apartment and a normal job. But normal wasn't working. Normal was drowning. This was a gamble, but at least it was hers. The next afternoon, Nina stood in the store with a cashier's check in her hand and a sick feeling in her stomach. Mr. Kowalski signed the papers, handed her the keys, and shook her hand with tears in his eyes. "Good luck," he said. "I think you'll need it." After he left, Nina stood in the silence of her new store, her new life, and let herself feel the weight of what she'd just done. Lucia ran between the racks, laughing, pulling out strange hats and oversized coats. For the first time in months, Nina heard her daughter laugh without worry behind it. Maybe this wasn't a mistake. Maybe this was exactly what they needed. That night, they slept on an air mattress in the upstairs apartment. Nina lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the building settling, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic outside. She was almost asleep when she heard it. Footsteps downstairs, slow and deliberate. Then the creak of the back door, the one she'd locked herself. Nina's eyes snapped open, her heart hammering. Someone was inside the store. She grabbed her phone, ready to call 911, and crept to the top of the stairs. The footsteps moved through the store, stopping and starting, like someone was searching for something. Nina held her breath, her hand shaking. Then the footsteps stopped. Silence. She waited, frozen, for what felt like hours. Finally, she heard the back door close softly, and the sound of footsteps fading into the night. When Nina finally went downstairs to check, the back door was locked. Nothing seemed disturbed. But she could feel it. Someone had been here. Someone knew she'd bought this place. And they were looking for something. Nina didn't sleep the rest of the night. She sat on the air mattress with a baseball bat across her lap, listening to every creak and groan of the old building. Lucia slept beside her, curled into a ball, oblivious to the fear that had settled like ice in Nina's chest. When dawn finally broke, Nina went downstairs. The back door looked normal, locked from the inside, just as she'd left it. But when she examined it closely in the morning light, she saw fresh scratches around the lock. Someone had picked it. Carefully, professionally. Nina's hands trembled as she checked the rest of the store. Nothing was missing. The ancient cash register still sat on the counter, empty but untouched. The racks of clothes hung undisturbed. Even the jar of coins by the register, maybe $12 in quarters and dimes, hadn't been touched. Whoever broke in hadn't come to steal. They'd come looking for something specific. Nina pulled out her phone, thumb hovering over 911. But what would she say? Someone broke in but didn't take anything? The police would file a report and leave. She'd still be here, alone, with a daughter to protect and no answers. She put the phone away and made a different decision. She'd figure out what they were looking for, and she'd find it first. By mid-morning, Nina had Lucia set up at the counter with coloring books and snacks. The girl was content, humming to herself, while Nina began the overwhelming task of sorting through 40 years of accumulated inventory. The store was chaos. Racks crammed with clothes that smelled like mothballs and old perfume, shelves piled with chipped dishes, outdated electronics, books with cracked spines. Boxes stacked in corners, unlabeled and forgotten. Nina started in the back storage room, a narrow space lit by a single flickering bulb. Dust hung in the air like a curtain. She sneezed twice and kept digging. Most of it was junk, broken picture frames, a box of cassette tapes with no cases, a stack of magazines from 1987. She made piles sell, donate, trash, though the trash pile grew fastest. Then she found the corner marked donations, do not sell. The sign was handwritten, faded, taped to the wall above a stack of boxes that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Nina frowned. Why would donations be marked do not sell in a thrift store? She pulled the top box down. It was lighter than expected, full of old linens, yellowed with age. The second box held books, their pages brittle and spotted with mold. The third box was different. It was metal, heavy, locked with a rusted padlock that had no key. Decades-old packing tape covered every seam, peeling at the edges but still intact. A faded label on top read, Street Catherine's Estate, 1998. Hold. Nina stared at it. 1998. 27 years ago. Before Mr. Kowalski retired. Before the store started failing. When this place was still thriving. She tried the lock. It didn't budge. She shook the box gently. Something inside shifted, not heavy, but dense. It didn't sound like clothes or books. Mommy, I'm hungry. Nina looked up to see Lucia standing in the doorway, backlit by the store's front windows. Okay, baby, let's get lunch. She left the metal box where it was and took Lucia to the diner down the street. But her mind stayed on that box, on the label, on the lock, on the break-in. That evening, just as Nina was locking up for the night, the bell above the door chimed. A man stepped inside. He was in his 50s, well-dressed in a dark suit that looked expensive. His shoes were polished. His hair was perfectly combed. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Good evening. Are you the new owner? Nina's grip tightened on the keys. Can I help you? I hope so. He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to her. It was plain white with the name Richard Moss, Estate Services, and a phone number. I represent the previous owner's estate. Mr. Kowalski mentioned he'd sold the property, and I wanted to follow up on some unfinished business. What kind of business? There were several donation boxes that were never properly processed, family estate items that should have been returned but got mixed in with inventory by mistake. He smiled again. That same empty smile. I'm authorized to offer compensation, say $5,000 cash for any boxes you might have found marked, do not sell. Nina's heart kicked. $5,000 for donation boxes, for junk that had been sitting in a corner for decades. I haven't found anything like that, she lied. His smile tightened. Are you sure? I'd hate for there to be any complications. Estate law can be tricky. If items were donated by mistake, keeping them could be considered. I said I haven't found anything. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Nina could feel Lucia behind her, hiding near the counter, sensing the tension. Finally, the man nodded. Well, if you do come across anything, please call. That number will reach me anytime, day or night. He left, the bell chiming cheerfully behind him. Nina locked the door and leaned against it, her pulse racing. $5,000 for donation boxes. Someone breaks in the first night. A man in an expensive suit offers cash for estate items. Nothing about this made sense. Unless whatever was in that metal box was worth a hell of a lot more than $5,000. After Lucia was asleep, Nina went back downstairs with a crowbar. The metal box sat where she'd left it, silent and waiting. Nina knelt beside it, wedged the crowbar under the lock, and pulled. The lock held. She tried again, harder. Metal groaned. Rust flaked away. On the third try, the lock snapped. Nina's hands shook as she peeled away the old packing tape. The lid was stuck, sealed by time and humidity. She worked it slowly, feeling it give inch by inch. Finally, it opened. Inside, layers of yellowed newspaper lined the bottom. Nina carefully pulled them aside, and beneath them, velvet pouches. 6 of them. Small, faded, tied with silk cords. Nina's breath caught. She picked up the first pouch. It was heavier than it looked. She untied the cord with trembling fingers and poured the contents into her palm. A necklace spilled out. diamonds and emeralds set in white gold, glittering even in the dim light of the storage room. Nina gasped. She opened the second pouch. A bracelet, sapphires. The third, earrings, more diamonds. The fourth, fifth, sixth, each one held jewelry that looked like it belonged in a museum. Nina sat back on her heels, staring at the fortunes spread across her lap. These weren't costume pieces. These were real. And someone had hidden them here, 27 years ago, in a donation box marked "Do Not Sell." Her mind raced. The break-in, the man offering $5,000, the way he'd smiled like he knew exactly what she had. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't junk. This was something people would kill for. Nina's hands shook as she carefully placed the jewelry back in the pouches, back in the box. She closed the lid and sat in the silence of the storage room, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She'd bought this store to save her daughter. But she'd just found something that could destroy them both. Nina didn't sleep that night either. She hid the metal box in the ceiling tiles above the storage room, standing on a stepladder with her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. The velvet pouches felt like they were burning through the metal, through her skin, branding her with something she couldn't undo. After Lucia was asleep, Nina sat at the small kitchen table with her laptop, the jewelry spread out on a towel in front of her. She started with images. Diamond necklace, emerald bracelet, sapphire earrings. The search results flooded her screen auction houses, estate sales, luxury boutiques. But none of them matched exactly. These weren't modern pieces. The settings were old, intricate, the kind of craftsmanship you didn't see anymore. Nina typed in a different search. Street Catherine's estate, 1,998. The first result made her stomach drop. Street Catherine's heist, $15 million in jewelry stolen, never recovered. She clicked. The article was from 1,998, archived from a local newspaper. It detailed how a private collector named Evelyn Street Catherine had loaned her jewelry collection to a charity exhibition. On the final night, someone bypassed security, disabled the alarms, and walked out with $15 million in jewels. The thief was never caught. The jewelry was never recovered. Nina scrolled through the photos embedded in the article. Her hands went cold. Their third photo down a diamond and emerald necklace identical to the one sitting on her kitchen table. And the bracelet, the earrings, the rings, every piece matched. Nina sat back, her breath coming shallow and fast. She was holding evidence of a major crime, a heist that had made national news. Jewelry that belonged to someone, maybe to heirs, maybe to museums, maybe to people who'd been searching for 27 years. Or maybe to the thief who'd hidden them and never came back. Her phone buzzed, a text from Maria. "How's the new place? You surviving?" Nina stared at the message. Surviving. That's all she'd been doing for years. Surviving eviction, surviving poverty, surviving the weight of raising a child alone. And now she was holding $15 million. She could sell one piece, just one, quietly. No one would know. It would be enough to fix the store, pay off debt, give Lucia everything she'd ever needed. Nina closed her eyes and saw Lucia's face. Her daughter, who never complained, who colored in donated books and wore shoes 2 sizes too small and smiled like the world was still good. What kind of mother would Nina be if she profited from stolen jewelry? What kind of mother would she be if she gave it back and lost everything? The next morning, Nina opened the store like normal. She smiled at customers, rang up sales, reorganized racks. But her mind was somewhere else, calculating, weighing options, trying to breathe through the knot of fear in her chest. That's when she noticed the SUV. It was parked across the street, black, tinted windows, engine running. Nina watched it from the front window, her heart picking up speed. It sat there for 20 minutes, then it pulled away. She told herself it was nothing, someone waiting for a friend, someone making a phone call. But the next day, it was back. And the day after that? On the 4th day, Nina saw the man. He stood near the corner, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky. Mid-40s, maybe. Athletic build. He wasn't looking at the store directly, but Nina could feel his attention. The way he leaned against the lamppost. The way he checked his phone, but never left. When Nina stepped outside to bring in a rack of coats, he was gone. She went back inside and locked the door, even though it was the middle of the day. Lucia looked up from her coloring. "Mommy, why are you scared?" "I'm not scared, baby." But she was. Someone knew. Someone was watching. And they were waiting for her to make a mistake. Nina stopped leaving Lucia alone. She walked her to school every morning, holding her hand too tight. She picked her up every afternoon, scanning the parking lot for the black SUV, for the man in sunglasses, for anyone who looked too interested. At night, she checked the locks 3 times. She kept the baseball bat by the bed. She barely slept. Maria called. "Nina, you sound exhausted. What's going on?" "Nothing, just adjusting to the new place." "You sure? You don't sound like yourself." Nina wanted to tell her, wanted to say, "I found $15 million in stolen jewelry and now someone's watching me and I don't know what to do." But she couldn't, because once she said it out loud, it would be real. "I'm fine," Nina said, "just tired." She hung up and stared at the ceiling, where the metal box sat hidden above layers of old insulation and dust. She could call the police, report it, hand it over. But what if they thought she was involved? What if they took the store as evidence? What if she lost everything she'd risked everything for? Nina pressed her hands to her face and tried not to cry. It was late, almost 11, when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Nina stared at it, her pulse spiking. She opened the message. "We know you found them. Keep them safe. We're coming for what's ours." Nina's hands went numb. Before she could process it, another text came through. A photo. Lucia's school. The front entrance. Taken today, during drop-off. Nina's breath stopped. The next message was simple. "Don't do anything stupid." Nina dropped the phone like it had burned her. She stood in the dark apartment, shaking, her mind screaming. They knew where Lucia went to school. They knew where she lived. They knew everything. And they were coming. Nina didn't wait until morning. She pulled up her old high school yearbook on Facebook, scrolling through names until she found him, Marco Silva. They'd been lab partners in chemistry, shared lunch tables, graduated the same year. She hadn't spoken to him in over a decade. But his profile said he was a detective now, Property Crimes Unit. Nina sent him a message at 2 in the morning. "Marco, it's Nina Vasquez. I know this is random, but I need help. It's urgent, please." She didn't expect a response, but 5 minutes later, her phone buzzed. "Nina? What's wrong? Are you okay?" She typed fast, her hands shaking. "Can we meet? Tomorrow morning? I can't explain over text." "I'll be there. Send me the address." Marco showed up at 8, still in his off-duty clothes, jeans, a faded police academy t-shirt, a coffee in hand. He looked older, his face carrying the weight of years spent seeing the worst in people. But his eyes were kind. "Nina." He pulled her into a quick hug. "It's been forever. What's going on?" She locked the door behind him and led him to the back room. The metal box sat on the table, the velvet pouches arranged beside it. Nina had barely slept, rehearsing what she'd say, how she'd explain without sounding insane. Marco saw the jewelry and went still. "Nina, where did you get these?" "I found them, in a donation box. Here, in the store." She spoke quickly, her words tumbling over each other. "Someone broke in the first night. Then a man showed up offering me $5,000 for donation boxes. Then I started getting watched. There's a black SUV, a guy in sunglasses, and last night I got texts. They sent me a picture of Lucia's school, Marco. They know where my daughter is." She was shaking now, tears threatening to spill. Marco picked up one of the necklaces, turning it over in his hands. His jaw tightened. "Do you know what these are?" "The Street Catherine's heist. 1,998. I looked it up." He nodded slowly. "Then you know this is serious." "Are they real?" "Yeah. They're real. Marco set the necklace down carefully. Nina, you need to tell me everything. From the beginning. She did. The eviction, buying the store, the break-in, the locked box, Richard Moss and his too white smile, the texts, the photo of Lucia's school. Marco listened without interrupting, his expression darkening with every detail. When she finished, he rubbed his face and exhaled hard. Okay. Here's what I know. The street Catherine's heist was an inside job. Evelyn Street. Catherine hired a private security guard named Thomas Brennan to oversee her collection during a charity exhibition. The night the jewels were stolen, Brennan disappeared. No trace, no evidence. Just gone. So he took them. That's what everyone believed. But we couldn't prove it. He had no criminal record, no debts, no obvious motive. He vanished for 7 years. Then, in 2005, he died in a car accident in Ohio. Single car crash, no witnesses. Nina's stomach turned. And the jewels? Never recovered. Case went cold. Marco looked at the jewelry spread across the table. Until now. Why would he hide them here? In a thrift store? He wouldn't. Not intentionally. Marco picked up the metal box, examining the label. Street Catherine's Estate, 1998. Hold. He frowned. This wasn't Brennan's hiding spot. Someone else put these here. Maybe an accomplice. Maybe someone who couldn't risk keeping them but didn't want to destroy them either. But why donate them to a thrift store? Maybe they didn't. Maybe the box was in storage somewhere, an estate sale, a foreclosure, and ended up here by mistake. Or maybe whoever hid them died before they could retrieve them. Marco met her eyes. Either way, someone's been looking for these jewels for a long time, and now they know you have them. Nina felt the room tilt. What do I do? Marco hesitated. The right thing is to report them. Turn them over as evidence. We reopen the case, trace the provenance, return the jewels to the rightful owners or their heirs. But officially reporting this takes time, paperwork, chain of custody, and until these jewels are locked in an evidence room, you're in danger. Whoever's been watching you, they're not going to wait for bureaucracy. Nina's throat tightened. So what are you saying? I'm saying I can arrange protection. Patrol cars near your store, escorts for Lucia. But Nina, these people have been patient for 27 years. If they think you're going to turn the jewels over to police, they might escalate. The word hung in the air like smoke. Escalate. I have a daughter, Marco. I know. His voice softened. That's why we need to move carefully. Let me make some calls. Get a plan in place. In the meantime, don't tell anyone else about this. Not friends, not family, no one. Nina nodded, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white. Marco stood, pulling out his phone. I'll have someone watching your store within the hour. And Nina? You did the right thing calling me. After he left, Nina sat alone in the storage room, staring at the jewels. $15 million. Enough to change everything. Enough to give Lucia a future. And enough to get them both killed. That night, Nina picked up Lucia from school, like always. But she noticed the black SUV immediately. It was parked 2 blocks away, engine running. Nina's pulse spiked. She walked faster, pulling Lucia along. Mommy, you're hurting my hand. Sorry, baby, we're just in a hurry. They got in the car. Nina locked the doors and drove home, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds. The SUV followed. Not close, not obvious, but there. Nina's hands shook on the steering wheel. When they got to the store, she rushed Lucia inside and locked the door. She closed the blinds, checked every window, turned on all the lights. At 10 o'clock, after Lucia was asleep, Nina heard a sound at the door. Not a knock, something sliding underneath. She crept downstairs, baseball bat in hand, and found a folded piece of paper on the floor. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The handwriting was neat, almost polite. Last chance, sell us the box, $50,000 cash. Tomorrow, 6 p.m., corner of 5th and Oak, come alone, or we take it and more. Nina read it 3 times, her breath coming in shallow gasps. $50,000. Or they take it, and more. She thought of Lucia asleep upstairs, her small body curled under a donated blanket, her face peaceful, unaware of the danger closing in around them. Nina crumpled the note in her fist. She pulled out her phone and texted Marco. They just gave me an ultimatum. Tomorrow, 6 p.m. What do I do? The reply came fast. Don't go. I'll handle it. Stay inside. Lock the doors. I'm sending someone to watch your place tonight. Nina locked the phone and stood in the dark store, surrounded by racks of old clothes and broken things people had thrown away. She'd bought this place to save her daughter. Now, she didn't know if they'd survive it. Outside, the black SUV sat in the shadows, waiting. Nina spent the day pretending everything was normal. She opened the store, smiled at customers, rang up a coat, a lamp, a stack of paperback novels. But her mind was somewhere else, counting down the hours until 6 o'clock. Until the meeting. Marco had told her not to go. Stay inside, lock the doors, let him handle it. But Nina couldn't stop thinking about the note, about the threat, or we take it and more. More meant Lucia. At 5:30, Nina closed the store early. She walked Lucia to Maria's apartment and lied about needing to meet with a supplier. You sure you're okay? Maria asked, studying Nina's face. You look exhausted. I'm fine, just a lot on my mind. Maria didn't look convinced, but she let it go. Nina kissed Lucia goodbye and drove to the corner of 5th and Oak. The man was already there. He stood beside a sleek gray sedan, hands in his pockets, looking almost casual. But Nina recognized him immediately, Richard Brennan, the nephew of the thief who'd started all of this. She parked and got out slowly, her heart hammering. Miss Vasquez. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Thank you for coming. I didn't have much choice. Fair enough. He gestured to a bench near the curb. Shall we talk? Nina sat, keeping distance between them. Richard settled beside her, unbothered by her tension. I want to be honest with you, he said. My uncle, Thomas, was a good man who made a bad decision. He worked for Evelyn Street Catherine for years, trusted, respected. But she treated him like furniture, paid him barely enough to survive while she draped herself in millions. Nina said nothing. When the opportunity came, he took it. Not out of greed, out of survival. Richard's voice was smooth, practiced. He hid the jewels, planning to sell them slowly, carefully, but he never got the chance. A car accident took him before he could retrieve them. So you've been looking for them ever since. My family has, yes. For 27 years, he turned to face her. That donation box was in a storage unit my uncle rented under a fake name. When he died, the rent went unpaid. Eventually, the unit was auctioned off. Someone bought it, didn't know what they had, and donated everything to your store. Nina's hands clenched in her lap. And now you want them back. I want to make a deal. Richard pulled an envelope from his jacket. $50,000. Cash. Right now, you give me the jewels, we both walk away. No police. No complications, no danger. Nina stared at the envelope. $50,000. She thought of the eviction notice, the empty bank account, Lucia's 2 small shoes, and the heat that barely worked, and the nights Nina had cried in the shower because she didn't know how much longer she could keep going. $50,000 would fix everything. The original owner is dead, Richard continued, his voice softening. The insurance company paid out decades ago. No one's waiting for these jewels. No one will miss them. You'd just be taking what's already lost. That's not true. Nina's voice was quiet. Those jewels belonged to someone, a family, people who cared about them. People who are dead. Maybe, but their children aren't, their grandchildren. Nina looked at him. You're asking me to profit from a crime. Richard's expression hardened slightly. I'm offering you a way out. You have a daughter, Miss Vasquez. A daughter who needs you safe and alive. Take the money. Forget you ever found the box. Go back to your life. Nina's throat tightened. If you've been following her story this far, watching her try to do the right thing while the world pushes her toward the wrong one, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Because sometimes, the hardest choices aren't between good and evil, they're between survival and integrity. I need to think about it, Nina said finally. Richard handed her the envelope. Take this. Consider it a down payment. Meet me tomorrow. Same time. Bring the jewels and I'll give you the rest. Nina took the envelope, feeling its weight. One more thing. Richard's voice dropped. Don't involve the police. If I even suspect you've talked to anyone, the deal's off. And Miss Vasquez, you don't want to find out what happens when the deal's off. He stood, straightened his jacket, and walked back to his car. Nina sat on the bench long after he'd driven away, the envelope in her lap. That night, Nina couldn't sleep. She lay on the air mattress, staring at the ceiling, the envelope hidden under her pillow. $50,000. She thought about Lucia, about the life she could give her, about never worrying where the next meal would come from or whether they'd have a place to sleep. But she also thought about the families who'd lost those jewels, about the victims of a crime that had never been solved. And she thought about the kind of mother she wanted to be. The kind who taught her daughter that integrity mattered, that doing what was right was more important than doing what was easy. Or the kind who taught her that survival came first, that sometimes you had to compromise your values to protect the people you loved. Nina closed her eyes, tears slipping down her temples. She didn't know which choice was right. She only knew that by morning, she had to decide. At dawn, Nina made her choice. She pulled out her phone and texted Marco. I need your help. I'm going to give them back. The reply came immediately. The jewels? Yes, all of them. To the rightful owners. But I need you to help me do it safely. Nina, are you sure? These people are dangerous. I'm sure. I can't live with myself if I don't. There was a long pause. Then, okay, I'll set something up, but we need to move fast. If they think you're backing out of the deal, they'll escalate. Nina set the phone down, her hands shaking. She'd made her decision. Now, she just had to survive it. At noon, Nina was restocking shelves when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up and froze. Richard Brennan stood in the doorway. But he wasn't alone. Two men flanked him, big, silent, the kind of men who didn't need to speak to make a threat. Richard smiled that empty smile. Miss Vasquez, I hope you've made your decision. Nina's heart stopped. I told you, tomorrow, same time. Plans change. He walked toward her slowly, his footsteps echoing on the old floor. I've been patient. My family's been patient. But patience has limits. The two men moved to block the door. Nina's pulse roared in her ears. Where are the jewels? Richard's voice was calm, almost polite. I don't have them here. Then you'll take us to them. Nina's mind raced. Lucia was at school. Marco didn't know they were here. She was alone. And if I don't? Richard's smile faded. Then we stop asking nicely. Nina's hand went to her phone in her pocket. Richard was 3 steps away, the two men blocking the door behind him. The store suddenly felt smaller, the air thinner. I don't respond well to threats, Nina said, her voice steadier than she felt. Richard's smile returned, cold and sharp. Then let's call it encouragement. Nina's thumb found Marco's number. She pressed dial without looking, praying he'd understand. The jewels are upstairs, she said loudly, in the apartment. I'll get them. Richard nodded to one of the men, who moved to follow her. Nina's phone was still connected, hidden in her pocket. She climbed the stairs slowly, her heart hammering so hard she thought Richard might hear it. Behind her, she heard Marco's voice, tiny and distant. Nina? Nina, what's happening? She couldn't answer, but she prayed he was listening. It happened fast. Nina reached the apartment and turned to face the man who'd followed her. He was bigger, up close, his expression flat and unreadable. Get the box, he said. Nina walked to the closet, moving slowly. She could hear sirens in the distance, faint, getting closer. Marco had heard. Marco was coming. She just needed to stall. It's heavy, Nina said, pulling the metal box from its hiding spot. I'll need help carrying it down. The man reached for it, and Nina let him take it. His attention shifted to the box, and for a moment, he wasn't watching her. That's when the sirens got loud. The man's head snapped toward the window. "What did you do?" Nina backed toward the stairs. "I called the police." Downstairs, she heard Richard swear, footsteps, the sound of the front door slamming open. "Police! Hands where we can see them." Nina's knees nearly gave out. The man in front of her hesitated, torn between grabbing her and running. In that split second, Nina did the only thing she could think of. She ran. She bolted past him, down the stairs, nearly tripping on the last step. The store was chaos. Richard was on the ground, hands behind his head. The two men were surrounded by officers in tactical gear. And Marco was there, his gun drawn, his eyes scanning the room until they found her. "Nina, are you okay?" She nodded, unable to speak. One of the officers moved to cuff Richard. He didn't resist, but his eyes stayed on Nina, cold and furious. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," he said. Marco stepped between them. "You're done talking." They dragged Richard out, along with his men. The store went quiet except for the crackle of police radios and the sound of Nina's ragged breathing. Marco holstered his weapon and crossed to her. "You scared the hell out of me." "I'm sorry, I didn't know what else to do." "You did exactly right," he gestured to one of the officers. "Get the box, it's upstairs." Nina watched them retrieve the metal box, the jewels that had turned her life upside down. Part of her felt relief, part of her felt loss. $50,000. Gone. But Lucia was safe, and Nina could still look at herself in the mirror. Marco touched her shoulder gently. "Come on, let's get your statement, then you can go pick up your daughter." At the station, Nina told them everything. The donation box, the break-in, Richard's threats, the texts, the photo of Lucia's school. They recorded her statement, took photos of the jewels, began the process of cataloging evidence. If you've been following her story this far, watching her fight to do what's right, even when everything in her screamed to take the money and run, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Because what happens next will remind you that, sometimes, the hardest choices lead to the most unexpected blessings. When it was over, Marco walked Nina out to her car. "What happens now?" she asked. "We reopen the Street Catherine case, trace the jewels, figure out who they belong to. If there are heirs, they'll be returned. If not, they'll likely go to a museum." Nina nodded, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over her. "And me?" "You're a witness. A hero, actually. You could have kept those jewels. You could have taken Richard's money. Instead, you risked your life to do what was right." Nina's throat tightened. "I don't feel like a hero. I feel like I just lost the only chance I had to give my daughter a better life." Marco was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There's something else you should know." "What?" "The Street Catherine collection, it wasn't just stolen from Evelyn. The jewels themselves have a history. During World War II, they were taken from Jewish families in Europe, looted, sold on the black market. Eventually, they ended up in private collections like Street Catherine's." Nina's breath caught. "The families who originally owned them, some of them are still out there. Grandchildren, great-grandchildren, they've been searching for these pieces for decades, not because of their value, because they're all they have left of their families." Nina felt tears sting her eyes. "You didn't just recover stolen property, Nina. You gave people back their history, their heritage, things they thought were lost forever." She looked at Marco, barely able to process what he was saying. "There'll be a ceremony," Marco continued. "When the jewels are returned, you should be there. So should Lucia." Nina wiped her eyes, nodding. She'd gambled everything on doing the right thing, and maybe, just maybe, it had been worth it. That night, Nina picked up Lucia from Maria's apartment. Her daughter ran into her arms, and Nina held her tight, breathing in the smell of her shampoo, feeling the solid warmth of her small body. "Mommy, you're squishing me." "Sorry, baby." Nina pulled back, brushing hair from Lucia's face. "I just missed you." "Did you finish your meeting?" "Yeah, I did." They drove home in comfortable silence. When they got to the store, Nina unlocked the door and they climbed the stairs to the apartment. It looked the same. The air mattress, the donated furniture, the cracked walls. But somehow it felt different. Nina had chosen this place to save them, and in the end, it had been the place where she'd saved herself. Lucia climbed into the sleeping bag and yawned. "Mommy?" "Yeah, baby. Are we going to be okay?" Nina lay down beside her, pulling her close. "Yeah, sweetheart, we're going to be okay." And for the first time in a long time, Nina believed it. 3 weeks later, Nina stood in a sunlit conference room at the county courthouse, wearing the only dress she owned that wasn't frayed at the hem. Lucia sat beside her, legs swinging, clutching Nina's hand. The room was full of people Nina didn't know. Lawyers, insurance representatives, museum curators, and at the front, seated in a row of chairs, were the families. 5 of them, descendants of the people whose jewelry had been stolen more than 70 years ago. Marco stood near the door, watching Nina with quiet pride. An insurance investigator named Mrs. Caldwell stepped to the podium. "Today, we're here to right a wrong that began during one of history's darkest chapters," she said. "These jewels were taken from families who lost everything. For decades, they were thought to be lost forever. But because of one person's courage and integrity, they've been found, and today, they go home." Nina's throat tightened. One by one, the families were called forward. Each piece of jewelry was presented in a velvet case, accompanied by documentation proving its provenance. A man in his 60s accepted a sapphire brooch that had belonged to his grandmother. His hands shook as he held it. A woman in her 40s received pearl earrings her great-aunt had worn on her wedding day. Then they called the last name. Mrs. Ruth Steinberg. An elderly woman stood slowly, leaning on a cane. She was small, frail, her white hair pulled back in a bun, but her eyes were sharp and bright. Mrs. Caldwell held up a diamond ring, simple, elegant, the kind of ring that had been worn every day, not saved for special occasions. "This engagement ring belonged to your grandmother, Clara Steinberg," Mrs. Caldwell said gently. "It was taken from her in 1943. Mrs. Steinberg reached for the ring with trembling fingers. She held it up to the light, tears streaming down her face. "I never thought I'd see it again," she whispered. "My mother told me about it, how my grandmother wore it every day, how she refused to take it off, even when they came for her." The room was silent. Mrs. Steinberg turned and looked directly at Nina. "You," she said, her voice breaking. "You're the one who found them?" Nina nodded, unable to speak. The old woman crossed the room slowly, her cane tapping against the floor. When she reached Nina, she took her hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Steinberg said. "You could have kept these. You could have sold them. But you didn't. You gave my family back a piece of our history. A piece of my grandmother." Nina's tears came then, hot and fast. "I'm sorry it took so long." "You have nothing to be sorry for." Mrs. Steinberg squeezed her hand. "You did what was right. That's more than most people would do." After the ceremony, Mrs. Caldwell pulled Nina aside. "There's one more thing," she said, handing Nina an envelope. "The insurance company and the families wanted to thank you. This is a reward for recovering the stolen property and helping to solve the case." Nina opened the envelope with shaking hands. A check, made out to her. $75,000. Nina stared at it, her vision blurring. "I didn't do it for money," she whispered. "We know," Mrs. Caldwell said gently. "That's exactly why you deserve it." That night, Nina sat at the small table in her apartment, the check spread in front of her. Lucia was asleep, her small body curled under a blanket Nina had bought at a yard sale. Nina thought about the past 3 weeks. The fear, the doubt, the moment she'd almost taken Richard's offer. She thought about Mrs. Steinberg's face when she held her grandmother's ring. And she thought about the kind of mother she wanted to be. The kind who taught her daughter that doing what was right wasn't always easy. But it was always worth it. Nina picked up her phone and called Marco. "Hey," she said when he answered. "I need your advice." "About the reward?" "Yeah, I want to use it to fix the store, make it into something the neighborhood needs. But I don't know where to start." Marco was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I know someone who can help. A community development consultant. She works with small businesses, helps them figure out sustainability, grants, all that. I'll send you her contact. Thank you, Marco, for everything. You did the hard part, Nina. I just showed up. After they hung up, Nina looked around the tiny apartment, at the cracked walls and the donated furniture and the life she'd built from nothing. It wasn't much, but it was honest. And that mattered more than any amount of money. 6 months later, the thrift store looked different. The windows were clean, letting in light. The racks were organized. Fresh paint covered the walls. A sign out front read, Second Chances Thrift, where every story matters. Nina stood behind the counter, ringing up a customer's purchase, a winter coat for her son. The store was busy now, not just with customers, but with volunteers, people from the neighborhood who wanted to help, who believed in what Nina was building. Lucia sat at a small desk in the corner, doing homework. She looked up and smiled. Nina smiled back. The reward money had done more than fix the store. It had given Nina the breathing room to think, to plan, to build something sustainable. She'd paid off her debts, set aside money for Lucia's education, invested in the store's future. But the real reward was something else. It was the way she could look at herself in the mirror now, the way Lucia looked at her with pride, instead of worry. It was knowing that when she'd been tested, when survival and integrity had stood on opposite sides of a scale, she'd chosen integrity. And somehow, survival had followed. One evening, as Nina was closing up, the bell above the door chimed. Mrs. Steinberg stood in the doorway, leaning on her cane. I hope you don't mind, she said. I wanted to see what you'd built. Nina smiled. Come in, please. The old woman walked slowly through the store, running her hand along the racks, examining the shelves. It's beautiful, she said finally. You've made something good here. I'm trying. Mrs. Steinberg turned to face her. My grandmother used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they do when things are easy. It's what they do when everything is hard. Nina's throat tightened. You were tested, Nina, and you passed. Nina didn't know what to say, so she just nodded, tears stinging her eyes. Mrs. Steinberg reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. This is for your daughter, she said, for her education, from my family to yours. Nina shook her head. I can't. You can, and you will. The old woman pressed the envelope into Nina's hand. Because you taught us something important. That there are still people in the world who choose what's right over what's easy. That's a lesson worth passing on. After Mrs. Steinberg left, Nina opened the envelope. Inside was a check for $10,000 and a note, written in careful handwriting. For Lucia, may she grow up knowing that integrity is the greatest inheritance of all. Nina sat down on the floor of her store and cried. Not from sadness, not from fear, but from gratitude. 1 year later, Nina stood behind the counter of Second Chances Thrift, watching the morning light spill through the clean windows. The store was alive now. Customers browsed the racks, volunteers sorted donations in the back room, and somewhere a radio played softly. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the small break area Nina had set up for her staff. She'd hired 3 people, single parents, like her, people who needed a chance. On the wall behind the register hung a framed photograph from the ceremony. Nina standing beside Mrs. Steinberg, both of them smiling through tears. Beside it, the letter Mrs. Steinberg had written, thanking her for choosing courage over convenience. Nina read it sometimes, on hard days. When the bills piled up or the doubts crept in, it reminded her why she'd made the choice she did. The bell above the door chimed, and Lucia ran in, her backpack bouncing. Mom, Mrs. Patterson needs help carrying her bags. Nina smiled. Go help her, sweetheart. I'll be right there. She watched Lucia rush back outside to assist the elderly woman who lived down the street. The girl who used to be afraid of everything now moved through the world with quiet confidence. That alone was worth more than any jewels. That evening, after the last customer left, Nina locked the door and turned off the lights. Lucia sat on the counter, swinging her legs. Mommy? Yeah, baby? Are you happy we didn't keep the jewels? Nina stopped, the keys still in her hand. She walked over and knelt in front of her daughter. Why do you ask? Lucia shrugged. I heard some kids at school talking. They said we could have been rich, that we were dumb for giving them back. Nina's chest tightened. She cupped Lucia's face gently. Do you think we were dumb? Lucia thought for a moment, then she shook her head. No, I think we were brave. Nina's eyes filled with tears. You know what, baby? We kept something better than jewels. What? We kept who we are. Lucia smiled, that bright, unguarded smile that made everything worth it. I like who we are. Nina pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. Outside, the street was quiet. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Nina stood in the doorway of her store, Lucia's hand in hers, and looked at the neighborhood she'd become part of. The families who shopped here, the volunteers who believed in what she was building, the customers who told her their stories and trusted her with their struggles. This was her wealth now, not jewels or money or security measured in bank accounts. It was community, connection, the knowledge that she'd built something honest. She thought about the metal box, the velvet pouches, the glittering stones that had promised to solve every problem. And she thought about the choice she'd made, the hardest choice of her life. Nina whispered to herself, so quietly that only the wind could hear. Some treasures you find, others you become. Lucia tugged her hand. Come on, Mom, let's go home. Nina smiled, locked the door, and walked down the street with her daughter. Above them, the store's sign glowed in the fading light. Second Chances Thrift, where every story matters. And somewhere in the city, in homes filled with laughter and memory, 5 families held heirlooms they'd thought were lost forever. Because one woman had chosen truth over treasure. And in doing so, had found both. When life puts a fortune in your hands and desperation in your heart, remember this: temptation doesn't make us weak, it's what we do with it that makes us strong. Because redemption isn't about what we gain, it's about what we're brave enough to let go.